We will catch up with Governor Jim Gilmore coming up here on the program. Also, your chance to win $100,000 as we celebrate 100 years of News Radio WRVA coming up, all brought to you by RoofMax before 10 o'clock today. Let's run out to the WRVA Newsmaker hotline. Joining us right now, our former governor, our former attorney general. He was Commonwealth attorney in Henrico, and, of course, U.S. ambassador, Governor Jim Gilmore, our guest here on News Radio WRVA. That's a lot of titles, sir.
Well, maybe too many, but I'm just a guy on the radio this morning.
Which title, when people introduce you, because you do a lot of speaking, you're asked to speak in a lot of different places, which title do they use when they address you? Do they say ambassador or do they say governor? I just kind of default to what to governor.
Well, look, people put me on the spot on things like that because if you tell people what to call you, it's pretentious, and I don't really want to be that way. My experience is that if I'm running around Washington doing foreign policy matters, then people have a tendency to call me ambassador. And if I'm any other time, especially around Virginia, people call me governor. I consider governor to be the higher position, but I don't ask anybody to call me anything, Rich. I'm just glad to have a chance to talk to people.
I'm just going to call you my friend, and we'll leave it at that. I have to get reaction. Monday, I went to the Supreme Court and I watched the oral arguments. And I was taken aback. I thought that and I'll call them the Democrats, because if we get to the plaintiffs and the rest, it'll confuse people. But I thought on the Democratic side, I thought they'd have stronger arguments on the gerrymandering. And I thought the Republican lawyers did a good job, and most court observers thought that as well. What were your thoughts?
Well, look, if I've got one message to the listeners, it's to look at this issue of the gerrymander in Virginia completely. I think that there was a tendency to think because of the narrow victory on the referendum that's all over now, and that we have this unfair map and we just got to eat it. But that's not really true. We still have a right to determine whether or not the gerrymandered unfair map was legally constituted or not. And right now, that's what's in the courts, and we have an obligation to fight on that, and the court has an obligation to consider it. It's worrisome, though, but I think that when the court let the referendum go forward and it narrowly passed, it makes it harder for the Supreme Court to overturn it. But the Supreme Court has got other issues here about fairness that they're going to be considering. The ballot language was bad. The district this is a bald-faced effort to deprive the Republicans of fair representation. And, to my horror, a narrow majority of Virginians agreed, which means that half of the Virginia voters are depriving the franchise the vote to the other half. Because if you already know that the Democrats are going to win in 10 out of 11 districts, why run? Why organize? Why contribute? Why do any of those things? Which means we're returning back to a one-party government again, the way the Democrats had some decades ago, when only the Democrats had an opportunity to win because of the way they were redistricting. Well, a lot of hard work by people. We brought a two-party system into effect in Virginia. And now there's a fair opportunity for the Republicans to offer a fair alternative. But that disappears in this district redrawing. A point I made, by the way, in that little podcast that you were mentioning, you were nice enough to help me put on a podcast, which I put on my social media, you put on your WRVA media, and you've told me that a lot of people looked at that. I'm surprised.
We're almost at 10,000 views of people that wanted to hear your reaction. Okay, can I put you on the spot for just a moment?
Oh, again? Go ahead.
Again, yes, exactly. I'll put you on the spot. You talk about things, the way things were under the Byrd regime, where it was Democratic, one-party state. Republicans could go kick rocks. You were part of the Young Guns Republicans that evened up the power base, so we became a state where you had checks and balances, you had two parties, you had opportunities for people to make choices. Tell me how that made the state better from just one-party rule to two parties competing.
Well, look, that's just basic government. People are entitled to have some alternatives. If you've only got one party basically having a chance to win, why vote? Everybody knows at that point what the outcome's going to be. That's not democracy. You got to have two parties offering some alternatives. And then the people have a choice. That's the way we do business in the United States of America. And we brought that into reality here in Virginia through much hard work.
But once that happened, sir, let me interrupt you for a second. But once that happened, how did the quality of life, how did the state change? Because I would imagine I've lived in one-party states, and it's one party, and if they have bad ideas, there's no one there to offer alternatives.
Well, look, that's right. Under the old Democrat machine back some decades ago, you never would have seen, a Governor Allen, you never would have seen a Governor Gilmore or Governor Youngkin or Governor McDonald, just people who wouldn't have existed. The Democrats would have been in charge, and then it would have been just an internal debate within the Democratic Party as to whether how liberal or conservative you were going to be. But the Democratic Party turned left, hard left, some years ago, and the Republicans offered alternatives and prevailed very often. In fact, we even brought a majority into the state Senate and the House of Delegates over top of the gerrymandering that they used to do, so that the people would have a choice. And that was one of the goals that I was trying to achieve as governor. I had other things I was doing in technology and the car tax cut. But politically, I wanted to make Virginia a modern political state for the 21st century, and we succeeded. This map that's underway right now, that's in the courts, is going to reverse all that because the Democratic Party will be the only party who will have a chance to elect people. This is at the congressional level. It remains to be seen what they do for other votes. And statewide races, you can still offer both parties, but it's going to be harder to organize statewide if you are not really having a fair chance to elect anybody in the Congress.
100%. It would be hard for one party to sustain if you wipe out the entire congressional district and be able to have much momentum. I got two questions I wanted to ask you. The first one is, the definition of is. I played the Bill Clinton famous quote from his deposition when he was talking about what depends on what the definition of is. When I'm sitting there at the Supreme Court, I'm watching them and they're parsing semantics over what is an election. Is it election day? And that's what the Democrats would have you believe that it's the day of the elections and nothing else counts before that. It's just there. And the Republican lawyer was saying, no, it's when the votes start coming in. We had 1 million votes that were cast in the Commonwealth of Virginia before this was even introduced to be a referendum. And the other thing, and I'm kicking myself over this, sir. I should have used more clear language that this was a referendum, not about maps. This was changing our Constitution. I never saw anybody on the yes side tell the people we're changing the Constitution temporarily.
Well, again, the ballot language said it was going to be temporary, which it is not. So the ballot language, which, by the way, was official wrongdoing, suggested that it was temporary. It is not. It's going to skew the elections in this year in 26, again in 28, and again in 30. And that's going to transform the politics of Virginia. Look, you have helped me do this little podcast, and I'm, it was an experiment, but apparently it succeeded. If people want to see it, you can see it certainly on my webpage, which is gilmoreambassador@gmail.com. And I looked it up a minute ago. It's there. It isn't very pretty, and it's pretty rough around the edges.
No, it looked good. 10,000 people can't be wrong, sir.
Well, I get it. Look, I'm very pleased about it. gilmoreambassador@gmail.com. You can turn the video on, and I'm really talking about the redistricting and what I think is a problem. One of the problems I didn't emphasize too much was the illegality of actually setting this vote up to begin with. Apparently, the Democrats, in their rush to try to skew the elections and get at Trump, just kind of rushed it through and didn't do all the processes the way they were supposed to under the law. And again, the people still have to obey the law, and I think they didn't. And as a result, that's in the courts right now. My little podcast is talking about the unfairness of it all and the consequences politically of letting this go forward. That's really what I've talked about on this radio station and what I'm talking about in the podcast. Like I say, it ain't very pretty, but I was kind of spontaneous, and maybe that's why people like it. I don't know.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a big favor because we talk about the law, and I know as someone who practiced law, believes in law, I watched Jonathan Turley when he came to the Library of Virginia, and it really left an impact on me. And he said to everybody there that when things get tough, you lean into the visions of the founding father, you lean into the Constitution. You lean into the letter of the law. So I'm on record right now. I'm going to trust the Commonwealth of Virginia's Supreme Court. Whatever they say, I'm going to follow. I might not like it, but that's the highest court in this Commonwealth, and we've all agreed that they get to decide, they get to be the arbiter of this. And I hope everybody can have that honest discussion and say, listen, these are the referees. They call balls and strikes. Whatever they say goes. And I'm going to put my faith into the law. It's not easy right now, sir, but I want to make sure I go on record. Everybody knows I'm leaning into the law right now because that's the thing that holds us together, the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Well, look, the politics of the state and the nation and the law of the state and the nation exist parallel to each other. And we've all agreed that the politics has to follow the law. That's what we are, a rule of law. And I was interested in the fact when I looked up the Constitution of Virginia that it has a requirement on these districts that they be compact and contiguous, just like the federal standards. Well, Virginia has a right to consider all that, and we've got a Virginia Constitution we have to live by. And, it's interesting. This was argued in the Richmond courts, and the judge in Richmond sort of brushed that aside, but I don't think you really can. I think you have to really pay attention to the fact of whether the politics is following the law and following the Constitution. In my opinion, they didn't this time, and I think that the Supreme Court of Virginia will throw out this referendum and throw out the change that the Democrats are trying to force on people. But I can't guarantee it. I think it's very difficult for the judges, because of the referendum. The referendum should never have gone forward in the first place. But now the courts are going to have to be, thinking about the long run, about the law and the protections that the law gives to the people of Virginia, which they're not being protected now. And the excuse is, well, we got to go get Trump. Well, yeah, okay, I understand that motivation, but I don't agree with what they were doing in Texas. I don't agree with what they were doing in California, and I certainly don't agree with doing this in Virginia because it has a direct impact on the two-party system in Virginia. Which I just explained, I and many, many others were trying to bring forward so the people of Virginia would have a choice of the democracy. We achieved that. And now, of course, the Democrats are trying to reverse that, and their excuse is that they want to do something bad to the president.
So my retort to that would be, so if Donald Trump is so egregious, if he's so evil, if he's such a dictator, fascist, Nazi, whatever you call him, you should be able to win. You should be able to win 11-1. And not have to redistrict if you thought that he was really that bad. If it was really that bad, you could easily defeat the Republicans 11-1. And if you can't do that, then maybe what you're saying isn't necessarily true. But again, I'm going to lean into the law. If they overturn it, I'm going to be happy because I think that's the right thing to do. But if they don't overturn it, I'm going to respect the decisions of the court. That's what you do as someone who believes in the rule of law. Sir, we'll continue our conversation because I do want to ask you a couple things. I don't really understand on some of the Eastern European elections. I want to ask you about Hungary and a race over there when I was over in Ireland. That was big news. And I want to get your thoughts on what we see right now in, I don't want to call it a stalemate, but we've moved from a kinetic war in the Middle East to now a war of attrition when it comes to economics in the Strait of Hormuz. So if we could touch that coming up next, I'd appreciate it. We'll continue with you. I'm Rich Herrera. This is News Radio WRVA, the voice of Virginia, as we catch up with Governor Jim Gilmore on Thursday. Today's program brought to you in part by A-Plus Roofing. Inflation is taking a bite out of a lot of people. And if you're ready to get a new roof, you've got to be aware of something. Billy Kane over at A-Plus Roofing wants you to know that right now shingles and roofing materials